I'm James Williams, and I've always loved the quiet life on my farm. 5 acres, just outside of town. It was my sanctuary after retiring from the Army, a place to raise animals, grow vegetables, and enjoy the simple things. For years, my closest neighbors were fields and the occasional car on the dirt road. Then, everything changed. A huge new subdivision popped up next door. Rows of identical houses, perfect lawns, sidewalks everywhere. I wasn't thrilled about suburbia creeping in, but I didn't mind at first. New families, a quiet HOA that seemed to just keep things tidy. I figured as long as they stayed on their side of the property line, we'd be fine. One spring morning, I'm out in the barn with my chickens when I see something out of the corner of my eye. 2 guys in uniform are walking through my field. Dark polo shirts, HOA patrol, in big letters. One's got a clipboard, the other a tablet. They look totally out of place. I frowned, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked out of the barn. They didn't notice me at first, busy studying my fence line. I cleared my throat, and they turned. "Can I help you?" I asked. The clipboard guy stepped forward. "Good morning, sir. We're with the HOA patrol, here for a routine inspection." I raised an eyebrow. "Inspection? For what?" "Standard compliance checks," he said smoothly. "Making sure all properties meet community guidelines." I crossed my arms. "This property isn't part of your HOA." They exchanged glances. The tablet guy spoke. "Actually, sir, all properties in this district are subject to HOA oversight." My patience was wearing thin. "No, they're not. My land has never been part of the HOA. This farm was here long before your subdivision." Clipboard guy flipped through some pages. "We have documentation showing your property is within our jurisdiction." I narrowed my eyes. "You're trespassing. I didn't give you permission to be on my land. Unless you have a warrant, I suggest you leave." They hesitated, then clipboard guy nodded. "We'll make a note of your concerns, sir, but I'd encourage you to review the community standards." And they walked away, back towards the subdivision. I stood there, fuming. The idea of some outside group imposing their rules on me was infuriating. I pulled out my property paperwork. Deeds, maps, surveys, everything showed my farm was not part of the HOA. I tried to forget about it, but a few days later, I saw them again, standing at the edge of my property, taking pictures of my chicken coop. I walked over, my boots crunching on the gravel. "I thought I made myself clear," I said. "You have no business being here." "We're on the public easement, sir," one of them said, pointing to the strip of land between my fence and the road. I frowned. "You're harassing me. This is private property. You can't take pictures." The camera guy shrugged. "Just documenting potential violations. If your property meets the guidelines, you've got nothing to worry about." "There are no violations," I said, my blood pressure rising. "I'm not part of your HOA. Get off my property and leave me alone." They grumbled and walked away, but they kept coming back. Parked at the end of my driveway with binoculars, trying to measure my fence. Each time, I confronted them, and each time, they gave me the same vague excuses. Finally, I'd had enough. I installed security cameras everywhere. I also talked to my neighbors. Some of them were also annoyed with the HOA's increasingly invasive rules. I started documenting every interaction with the HOA patrol, their trespassing, their letters, photos of their cars parked near my farm. I didn't know what their game was, but I would fight back. By the end of the month, I had a file of evidence. I didn't know it then, but the battle was just getting started. A few days later, I got a letter from the HOA. Formal, embossed logo, the whole bit. I ripped it open right there on my porch. It was condescending and infuriating. They claimed my property violated several community standards: my unsightly fence, my livestock, the non-compliant structure of my barn. They gave me 2 weeks to fix these issues or face fines and legal action. I was shaking with anger. How dare they make demands about a property they had no control over? I spent the rest of the day fuming. That evening, I reviewed my property documents again. Deed, zoning maps, everything. I was right. They were wrong. But their letter made me doubt myself. Had something changed without my knowledge? I needed to be sure. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. The clerk, a friendly woman with glasses, greeted me. I explained the situation. She nodded sympathetically and looked up my property records. "You're not the first person to ask about that HOA," she said. "They've gotten a bit aggressive lately." After a few minutes, she printed out my records. "Here you go," she said. "Your property is still zoned agricultural and isn't part of the HOA's jurisdiction. It's very clear." I sighed with relief. Thank you. This is exactly what I needed. As I was leaving, she said, you might want to keep an eye on them, though. Just because they're not supposed to have authority doesn't mean they won't try something. That night, I wrote a formal response to the HOA. I told them, in no uncertain terms, that my property wasn't under their control and included copies of my deed and the county zoning records. I demanded they stop harassing me. I mailed the letter, hoping that would be the end of it. But I knew better. Sure enough, a few days later, another letter arrived. Even more absurd than the first. They claimed that even though my farm wasn't technically in their community, it still impacted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood and therefore fell under their extended guidelines. They said my farm could lower property values, which gave them the right to tell me what to do. I couldn't believe it. They wouldn't stop until they got their way. I decided to gather more evidence. I talked to my neighbors in the subdivision. I started with Sarah, a young mom who lived near my property line. She was sympathetic but scared of the HOA. They're ruthless, she said. They fined us $500 last year because our mailbox was the wrong shade of white. When we complained, they threatened to ban us from the community pool. That's outrageous. I said, have they done this kind of thing before, trying to enforce rules on property outside the HOA? Sarah hesitated. I've heard rumors. There was an older couple who had a similar problem. They ended up selling their house and moving because the HOA wouldn't leave them alone. I thanked Sarah and talked to other neighbors. The stories were all the same. The HOA was a bully, using fines and intimidation to get what they wanted. But I wasn't afraid of a fight. I decided to get serious. I contacted a lawyer, Rebecca Carter, who specialized in property disputes. She was immediately interested. This is classic HOA overreach, she said. They're trying to assert authority they don't have, hoping you don't know your rights. But you've done your research, and you have the proof. We can fight this. Rebecca told me to document everything and install more security cameras. The more evidence, the better, she said. I followed her advice. Cameras everywhere, detailed logs of every HOA encounter. I also contacted the local news. A reporter interviewed me and took pictures of the HOA patrol cars parked near my property. The article, Local Farmer Stands Up to HOA Overreach, was published the next week and went viral. People reached out, offering support and sharing their own HOA horror stories. The article also put me on the HOA's radar. The next letter I got was from their lawyer, a thinly veiled threat. They'd sue me if I didn't comply with their demands. I knew the fight wasn't over, but I wasn't backing down. With Rebecca and the community's support, I was ready. I wasn't surprised by the lawyer's letter. I knew they'd escalate. It was full of legal jargon, accusing me of violating community guidelines and causing irreparable harm to property values. It gave me a final warning: comply within 14 days or they'd sue. For a second, I worried. Legal battles are expensive, but I knew I was right. I had the proof. They could send all the threatening letters they wanted. It didn't change the facts. I called Rebecca and sent her the letter. She called back quickly, sounding calm but firm. They're trying to intimidate you, James. This letter is full of empty threats. Legally, they have no case. In fact, this letter helps us. We can use it to show their pattern of harassment. What should we do? I asked. We'll write a formal response, making it clear you're not under their jurisdiction and highlighting their violations of your property rights. We'll demand they stop all patrols and communication. And since we have proof of their trespassing, we can warn them that further incidents will result in a countersuit. I felt a renewed sense of determination. Rebecca drafted the response, and I kept documenting everything. The HOA patrols got bolder, their cars idling at the end of my driveway for hours. One morning, I even saw one of them trying to measure my barn with a laser rangefinder. I didn't confront them. I just let my cameras record. Rebecca's response was perfect. It systematically dismantled the HOA's claims, citing the property deed and zoning laws. It listed the instances of trespassing and harassment with dates, times, and photos. It warned them that any further attempts to enforce their rules would result in legal action. I mailed the letter, feeling satisfied, but the fight wasn't over. A week later, the HOA tried a new tactic, parking just outside my property line with their engines running for hours. It was annoying, but I wasn't intimidated. I focused on my farm work. It was spring, a busy time. I tended my chickens, planted crops, repaired fences, ignoring the HOA goons as best I could. Meanwhile, Rebecca filed a formal complaint with the county, detailing the harassment and trespassing. The county officials were shocked and promised to investigate. A few weeks later, the county zoning office called. An inspector wanted to visit and verify my property lines. I agreed. The inspector, Tom, was polite and professional. He took measurements, reviewed my documents, and confirmed what I already knew. My farm wasn't part of the HOA, and their claims were baseless. "This is pretty clear-cut," Tom said, handing me a copy of his report. "I'll file this with the county, and we'll send a formal notice to the HOA telling them to back off." I thanked him, feeling relieved. With the county's support, I felt confident I could end this. But the relief didn't last. A few days later, I was reviewing my security footage and saw one of the HOA patrol cars had driven onto my property late at night, stopping near my barn for several minutes. Trespassing. I sent the footage to Rebecca immediately. "This is a game changer," she said. "They've crossed a major line. We can sue them for trespassing and harassment, and this video is key." Rebecca filed the lawsuit. It made local news and blew up online. The story of a farmer fighting an overreaching HOA resonated with people. I was suddenly in the spotlight, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The HOA had money and lawyers. They weren't going to give up, but I wasn't backing down either. With Rebecca and the community behind me, I was ready to fight for my farm and for the principle that nobody should be bullied by unjust authority. Filing the lawsuit changed everything. It wasn't just about my farm anymore. It was about principle. The HOA's behavior was a clear abuse of power, and I wouldn't let them get away with it. The lawsuit, trespassing, harassment, defamation, sent shockwaves through the community. I felt like I was finally fighting back. The HOA denied everything, accusing me of provoking conflict and undermining their authority. They called me a troublemaker, disrupting community harmony. I was furious. Rebecca wasn't worried. "Classic tactic," she said. "They're trying to make you look bad. But we have the evidence, and that's what matters." In the following weeks, Rebecca built a mountain of evidence: videos of trespassing, copies of threatening letters, the county's report. She also lined up witnesses, including my neighbors. The discovery process revealed even more about the HOA. Rebecca subpoenaed their communications and financial records and found a disturbing pattern. I wasn't the first person they targeted. They'd harassed other property owners, using intimidation and legal threats to force compliance. They'd even filed illegal liens, bullying people into selling their homes or joining the HOA. I was livid. "They think they can just steamroll anyone who gets in their way," I said. "Well, not this time. This isn't just about your case anymore," Rebecca agreed. "If we win, it could set a precedent." As the trial approached, the community was buzzing. Some people supported me, others sided with the HOA. The HOA doubled down, holding a public meeting where they claimed they were just upholding community standards and that I was being unreasonable. They even distributed flyers calling me a disruptive influence. I showed the flyer to Rebecca. "They're really going all out," I said. "Desperation move," she said. "They know their case is weak, so they're trying to sway public opinion. But we're here to win in court." Finally, the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed. I sat with Rebecca, nervous but determined. The HOA's lawyers looked confident, but their lead attorney wouldn't look at me. Rebecca presented my case methodically: the deed and zoning documents, the videos of trespassing, the threatening letters. She called witnesses, including the county inspector and several neighbors. The testimony was powerful. Margaret, an elderly neighbor, described how the HOA harassed her for years over minor things like her mailbox and garden gnome. "They made my life hell," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm so glad someone is finally standing up to them." The HOA's arguments were weak. Their lawyer tried to argue that my farm impacted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood, but the judge dismissed it. They claimed their patrols hadn't trespassed, but Rebecca showed the video evidence. Their president even admitted under oath that they'd never actually checked if my property was under their jurisdiction before harassing me. That was a huge blow to their credibility. After days of testimony, the trial ended. The judge said she'd review the evidence before issuing her verdict. The waiting was agonizing. The verdict came, and it was a complete victory. The judge ruled the HOA had no authority over my property and had harassed and trespassed. They had to pay me damages, and she issued an injunction barring them from contacting me or setting foot on my property again. The courtroom buzzed with excitement. I felt a wave of relief and finally smiled. "You did it, James," Rebecca said. "You stood up to them, and you won." Leaving the courthouse, I was greeted with cheers and applause. The victory wasn't just mine. It was a win for everyone who'd been bullied by an HOA. The fight was tough, but it was worth it. I defended my farm, my freedom, and my principles. I'd shown that nobody is above the law. Winning the lawsuit was huge, but the fight wasn't really over. The judge's ruling was clear, but the HOA wasn't going down without a fight. The weeks after the trial were a roller coaster. I was relieved, of course, but exhausted. The months of conflict and legal battles had taken a toll. I just wanted to get back to my quiet life. The court's injunction stopped the HOA's patrols and letters. They also had to pay me a hefty sum in damages, which forced them to cut back on their activities. I was glad to see their overreach curtailed, but the publicity also made me a target. While many neighbors supported me, others, especially those loyal to the HOA, saw me as a troublemaker. One morning, I found an anonymous note in my mailbox. "You think you've won, but we'll make sure you regret it." I threw it away, but it bothered me. It was probably an empty threat, but it reminded me that the fight wasn't quite over. I doubled down on security, better cameras, motion sensor lights, and a guard dog named Max. He became a good friend and an extra layer of protection. It helped me feel safer, but I still felt like I was being watched. The trial's fallout continued. The publicity exposed the HOA's shady practices, and other residents started speaking out. A group of neighbors demanded a financial audit, suspecting misused funds. They were right. The audit revealed mismanagement and inflated salaries for board members. Residents were outraged and demanded resignations. Several board members, including the president, stepped down. The HOA, once so powerful, was now fractured and weakened. Watching the HOA unravel was a strange feeling. I hadn't meant to destroy them. I just wanted to protect my property. But as more people shared their stories, I realized my fight had exposed a bigger problem: the unchecked power of HOAs. Life on the farm slowly returned to normal. No more patrols, no more threats. I could finally focus on my animals, my crops, the simple pleasures of farm life. Max became part of the family, running through the fields and keeping watch. One evening, as I sat on my porch enjoying the sunset, Sarah, the young mom from the subdivision, stopped by with her kids and a basket of cookies. "You stood up to them when nobody else would," she said. "Because of you, things are finally changing." I smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "I didn't do it alone," I said. "Sometimes it just takes one person to get things started." Her kids ran off to play with Max, their laughter echoing across the fields. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard. My victory had a ripple effect. Other property owners started pushing back against HOA overreach, forming groups and challenging unfair rules. Local officials took notice too, introducing new regulations to limit HOA power and protect homeowners. Over the years, I became a kind of local legend. People would visit my farm, wanting to hear my story. I wasn't looking for fame, but I was happy to help others find the courage to stand up for themselves. In the end, my fight wasn't just about my farm. It was about the principle that nobody should be bullied into giving up their rights. It was about resilience, standing up to injustice, and the impact one person can have when they refuse to back down. Sitting on my porch, watching the sunset over my fields, I felt at peace. My farm was still my sanctuary, and I knew, no matter what, I could face any challenge head-on.